Hi, everyone. Thanks for connecting. We'll let everyone connect their audio. Those that want to turn on their camera. It's nice to see a full screen of members of the family law practice. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Rocio Molina. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Women's Advocacy Project. I wanted to first, in case I forget, wanted to thank the National Council of Juvenile and Court Judges and Jenny Talkin for hosting us. And then Veronica, if you want to go ahead and say your hellos while I connect the screen.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Veronica Stronson here with Michigan State University College of Law.
And so today we are going to start our conversation, and maybe it will be one of those part 2 conversations of where we talk about preparing immigrant survivors to co-parent with the other parent. And maybe I was just being a little PC with calling them the other parent. So just to be clear, I'm really meaning that a respondent, the abuser. And so we tell survivors, maybe advise them that it's best to leave. They decided to separate and file for abuse. But what sometimes they need to be prepared for is knowing that they're walking into a new form of abuse, what we call post-separation abuse. And so all too often the dominant partner in the relationship feels very threatened when the other parent decides to divorce. And so sometimes we see them get angry, hostile, and the abuse can show up in ways when they're co-parenting. So let's talk about that today. And then this is our community of practice crew, and thank you OVW for this space and time to have these conversations. These slides are just a guide, but I'm going to share them with you at the end of the session. And then just real quickly, just to make sure your chat works. No, I'm just kidding. It's just to know who's here, and also helps us for grant reporting to know how many numbers and people attended. And then when we're talking about what state you're in, it helps Veronica and I. Veronica's in Michigan, I'm in Texas, and I've practiced in Wisconsin. And so it helps us kind of narrow the conversation to your state. So tell us what state. You don't have to tell me the weather. I already know it's really hot everywhere. It is hot where I am. But I don't know. I guess that it's really nice in Washington State. And so we have Washington, Maryland. I'm in El Paso, Texas, where it's very hot. New York City, Cleveland, Ohio. I think go ahead and just type that in as we go through. And then just a quick little icebreaker. Maybe we can get to know each other a little better. But what's something that you bought during COVID, or maybe a skill that you learned that you brought you joy and that you still do today? Oh, watering the flower beds. I bought an inflatable hot tub. It was something that I thought was a waste of money, but it gave me a lot of joy, and it's a good way to cool off. And so the gardens and plants, and that's all part of our self-care. With our advocate community of practice, we were talking a lot about trauma-informed work these 2 last classes, and we're now getting to the self-care part of it, which is part of trauma-informed work. And they're going to do somebody suggested to do a meditation doodling class, and I'm going to invite you all to see who's available to learn how to do a little meditation doodling sometime in August. So keep an eye out for that invitation. Nobody got a puppy? I did, Veronica, but
Well, my dog actually lost weight during COVID because we walked her a lot. So that was good.
Nice. Okay, well, let's just jump into this, guys. Okay. So this is where this is one of these questions where I'm gonna see all your hands, I'm pretty sure. But who has worked with an immigrant client who continues to be abused post-separation and during the co-parenting? So, let's see. Almost everyone on here, right? And then. And so would you guys feel comfortable telling or chatting what you've seen? What's the kind of post-separation abuse that you've seen with your clients?
This is Geraldine. Threats to cancel or stop immigration adjustment documents.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's a really a tactic that is very effective, right? And good thing that we can, there's vowel remedies and other things to curb that, but that is a tactic that is very stressful for survivors. So like every good tool that there exists in the domestic violence world, there is a post-separation power and control wheel. And you're going to recognize a lot of these behaviors that are there. It's based off the Duluth model. And so the harassment, intimidation, and surveillance, the stalking, if it didn't exist before, it might be heightened post-separation. Undermining the ability of one parent to parent, discrediting them maybe to the community or to their family as a mother, withholding the financial support or immigration documents, maybe starting to endanger the children when they're in the visitation of the other parent, disrupting the relationship that the parent has with their children when they're with them, are some of the things that you'll see in that power and control wheel. And that I'll share that link with you, but the post-separation abuse doesn't just affect the survivor. It has, I don't know if many of you have seen the ACEs or the adverse childhood experiences that children that you do to assess how somebody is affected with long results of trauma that happened in their childhood. And one of them is what they see, childhood, whether there's divorce, violence, and emotional abuse. So children that are living in these households where the post-separation abuse continues to exist are going to be more impacted. And you all know that. So, and specifically for immigrants, you mentioned earlier about taking away the immigration applications that have already been started. A survivor's kit file, then a battered spouse waiver or VAWA self-petition. What are other ways that we see it with immigrants?
Well, in Annie listed that when her client was forced out of the house, she didn't receive the notices and then her case was closed, right? And that is so tragic because, as we work with immigrant clients, we also need to deal with immigration issues, not just with the custody or the trauma that the kids are going through or the continued abuse. And so that's why VAWA and you allow you to do a safe address, right? Like I usually tell my clients, get a PO box or, let's send all the correspondence to the attorney's office. So we at least have that information. But then we have cases where the clients run and disappear, and then you're not able to tell them that you got their case approved or that you got a work permit for them, right? And so it's very difficult to handle cases like that where the clients are in such a situation where they just have to run for safety, and then their safety is absolutely the main concern that they have. And so dealing with that on top, as I'm as I'm looking at the power and control post-separation, I see, right, Rocio, you're talking about it, but then I'm thinking, but then when you're dealing with clients who don't have lawful status, or maybe even some who do, that doesn't address any of those issues, right? Like we have like an additional layer with our clients.
So some safety planning that we might consider would be, before we start talking about what provisions you want in our orders, or how we can advise them to have safe exchanges, or how to co-parent with a parent with the other spouse that has abused them, is key to that is safety planning. And hopefully they're working together with an advocate or therapist or victim services in some form. But if not, it's good to have that conversation about what they need to do if they decide to leave the home, where to go, having a bag of clothes ready, having their identity documents ready. Important to know about passports, if they're undocumented, letting them know, about immigration remedies, what kind of documents they might need in order to file for those remedies. Having a person that knows about the violence call the police if something happens. If the kids are of age, teaching them to use, and it says telephone, but maybe I should have added it to say a cell phone to call the police when needed. And then maybe a code word for family or friends if they need help. So hopefully they're working together with an advocate or victim services, but we do need to have first that conversation about safety planning, and then understanding the risk of lethality that happens when separation occurs. And how do you think maybe that the ages might impact, that your clients' ages will impact their safety plan? Having maybe a small baby versus older kids. What do you think, Veronica?
One of the issues, as once we absolutely know that abusers are like master manipulators, right? And so, as you are mentioning the code word, right? Like they may actually be able to, the abuser may be able to ask the child, like if something happens, does your mom have this, right? And then the innocent child may just disclose that information, right? Like definitely with smaller children, it's more of an issue when you have to rely on daycare, and the abuser has to go pick up the child from daycare if they are co-parenting and they have visits for them. And so that's even more difficult, right? With a non-verbal kid, the same happens, right? Like how is the child going to say that something happened to him while in the care of the abuser, for example? With school, the schools are actually good, at least in my jurisdiction, where you bring the order and you tell them, right, like he's not able to come pick up the kids or get them out of school for some appointment, right? Like I'm the one who has all the appointments scheduled. This is what I do, and this is a copy of the order, right? So when the kids are in school, it's a little bit easier. That when you are dealing with kids who are being taken to daycare, or kids who don't have verbal communication yet.
Yeah, and then the younger kids might have more needs, so there's more need to communicate, but probably as they get older, hopefully that need becomes less. And we can talk about some of those strategies as the slide.
And and judges, before, the judges used to take into consideration if your client was breastfeeding, right? Like, or no overnights because the child is too little, or the medication or things like that. But now judges are, at least in my jurisdiction, a lot of the judges are leaning more towards joint custody, even when abuse has been documented. And I know we're going to cover this in a little bit, but it is important to think, right? Like before, we used to say, oh, the child is small, so that can only see him for like an hour, and the kid shouldn't be going to another house because of breastfeeding issues or the baby is too small. But now the judges don't really take that into consideration anymore the way they used to.
And Veronica, I know you do a lot of training for judges and maybe on not so much on this, but what do you think that is that shift that's making?
Well,
Like-
there has been a huge movement with with father rights groups, right? Like when they are advocating for equal treatment, for equal shared time with the children. They bring up the whole issue of, she's only using this as an excuse, right? And then when I train the judges, I usually ask them, and they are like, well, I look at the best interest of the children, right? Like the good judges, right, who come to our trainings. But there are judges who say, like the abuse happened when they were married and now they are separated or divorced. And so, there's no longer abuse. Why should I deny him his right to spend time with his son or his daughter, right? And so, I think it has been that push that people are pushing a lot more for joint legal and joint physical custody, and they don't really think about what would happen to the child.
So to ask the group, what are some temporary orders that you've asked for or advocated for that will curb some of these abuse that we see in the post power and control wheel? No, you can unmute or put on the chat.
I guess it would depend. I'll start. I guess it would depend, right? Like sometimes in my practice, I would say if I was asking for a child to be evaluated or if I was asking for the parties to go to mediation, I would say, no unsupervised visits until we get the report from the parent coordinator or evaluator, right? Like things like that. I would definitely ask for trying to figure out a good plan or, just limited visit, limited contact until we find out what's going to happen with his criminal case, for example, right? Sometimes they are, the abusers are charged criminally. And so you get a little bit of room to make sure that your client is prepared during this temporary period. But another thing too is that we need to make sure that we are telling the clients this may happen, or, we have this judge, right? Like go sit in the courtroom if you have time and go see how this judge deals with issues similar to yours, right? And then, they would actually go and figure out so they are not surprised and they don't blame you when the judge comes with a ruling of, I don't know, joint physical, for example.
That's a good idea. And so they share, I guess it's a minimizing of the contact. So digital child support payments using Venmo, Cash App, Zelle, so they don't have to have contact in person. And then Susan says the safe locations is available and using apps. Well, I want to pick your brain a little bit about the apps too, but using apps to communicate. And then they might want to ask for orders that say not to talk to the kids about the case, not to have disparaging comments about the parents while the case is pending. I think there's a whole lot of lists that you can add there, but you want to think about those things. Well, I wanted to share, also there in many states, there's that rebuttable, and I think this goes without saying here in this group, we talk about this all the time. There's a rebuttable presumption against awarding sole or joint legal custody to a parent who's engaged in domestic violence with the other parent. The National Council of Juvenile and Court Judges has this update of case law on this topic. And I'll share, I can't cut and paste while I'm sharing the slides. So I'll try to do it at the end or definitely a follow-up email. But this document has the case law from up to 2020 on that subject, and 28 states do that. And so I know Texas is one of those that when there's a finding of family violence, it rebuts the presumption, and then some exclusive rights are just given to the parent, the safer parent. But this
So,
research.
so do you need to have a finding to raise the rebuttable presumption in Texas?
Yes,
Because, you know, there are other jurisdictions where they actually take testimony, right? And so the judges may take that testimony and agree that there is a rebuttable presumption. And then there are other judges who expect an order of protection or a criminal conviction, right? Like they depending on what state you're in, you should definitely become familiar with your jurisdiction, because it also helps, even if your state doesn't have the domestic violence rebuttable presumption, just telling the judges that, you know, X number of states do, and this is what they do, right? Like that's actually a good advocacy piece as well, advocating for your state to get that as well.
and of you that are on this call, how many of you state does have that rebuttable presumption? Do you want to raise your hand? Megan State. Okay. Interesting. And this question goes a little bit about to what you were going, you know, the children, the community are really important for our immigrant families and the parents. So explaining to that parent how they're going to have to co-parent can be difficult. And I think you addressed that a little bit, some strategies, but if anybody wants to share what they've done or what they found to be useful, I really like that idea about sending them into court for them to see a case that's similar so that they can see that that's actually a reality. That was a really good suggestion you had, Veronica. And does anyone ever have anything similar that they do to explain to them that they have to co-parent, that they will, you know, starting this Thursday, that's coming to pick up kids? Megan shared that they do have that rebuttable presumption in Georgia, but it's also not taken as seriously as they should. So I put together a list of bullets, and, you know, as you see these, if other strategies you've used come to mind, feel free to put them in the chat and we can supplement them. But as I said earlier, working together with an advocate so they could have more holistic services. They might have more needs than we know. And, you know, in fact, yesterday I was looking at an advocate's program and their intake questionnaire, and they ask so many more questions about the survivor's life and their needs, medical needs, their children's needs that we do in our intakes and a legal intake. And so it's really good for them to work together with them. Encourage them to, you know, seek therapy so they can learn to set these clear boundaries. Often people that are in these domestic violence and relationships, the power and control's shifted. They've learned to kind of tiptoe around that abuser. And so there might not be ever have set clear boundaries in their life. And that's something that they need to learn, because that's how we are going to have effective co-parenting and stop that post-separation abuse. So encourage them to learn or seek support to get those clear boundaries. I know here in Texas, you have to take a mandatory parenting class, and so encouraging them to attend. And then also, if it's not court ordered, then asking the court to order it for both parties, or at least for sure for the respondent. And then if they are limited English proficient, you want to make sure that they have language access at all these points.
I was going to mention and ask, so Susan wrote on the chat that she explains, right, that DV must be considered, but also explaining that each of the parents has rights and they have the right to contact the children. But coming back to your first point, Rocio, with helping parents get counseling and or therapy for themselves and for the children, has anybody today have any issues related to having to ask permission of the court for the therapy for the children, or permission from the other parent for the children to attend any therapy sessions? Because that has been an issue for me, especially when the judges order joint legal custody, right? Like the parent cannot just go and start taking a child to see a psychologist, right? Like that has to that has to be approved, and so or agreed upon. And so, what difficulties do people have trying to get that when you know for sure that the child really needs to be going to therapy?
And I think Susan put, yes, I've asked shared legal custody. I'll ask for it in e-order.
Good, right? That's a good strategy. And maybe right now your client may not think the kids need it, or the kids are old enough where the kids are like, I'm not going, right? Like it doesn't hurt to have it in your order, even if you never use it, right? But when the time comes, or when the school tells you that the child is misbehaving or acting up or something is going on, then you at least have that order, right? Like it doesn't mean that the client immediately should take the child to therapy, but when you have it signed by the judge, then you have that option in the future.
Yeah. She shares, we often ask for the reunification therapy with parent and child. It's sometimes difficult to find a therapist and set it up, especially if the opposing party is unrepresented. Yeah. Okay, so here's a little shift. And I think maybe we'll see more hands, because look at it's part of the dynamic that we see with survivors. But how many of you have worked really hard to get your client a fantastic temporary order? And then when it's safe, it has all this good stuff that we just talked about, and then they get back with the abuser.
Well, that's why my hair is gray now, right? Like
Yes.
these things that your clients do. Does anybody want to say anything? Like Megan, is it okay if we put you on the spot? I'm just curious with people.
I'm not sure I can think of a specifics because it's happened multiple times, but just, you do all you can. And it's frustrating just knowing that you've used up all that, you spend all those resources of time and energy, and then they go back, and then it's really, it's harder. It affects the credibility with the judge next time if we get the chance to try to do it again, and then, if they get the courage to leave again. So that's frustrating, because I've definitely had judges say, why should I do this if you're just going to go back to him again?
Right. Yeah.
And I've had it actually affect the judges, their assessment of whether they thought it was a danger or not, because she went back.
Mm-hmm.
I could see why, but then, that it's like a part of the nature of this work, right? That is the dynamics of the domestic violence. Maybe once they start to pay child support, or they get the feel of what it's like to be separated, they want to go back and say they've changed and do the classes, and clients are trying to deal with cultural issues, not wanting to break up the family, and religious issues. And we're here to support them, and we know that will happen. And then I just wanted to make a point about immigration relief. You could still file for VAWA self-petition if they're undocumented. if they get back with the abuser, and if, as long as they continue to be helpful to law enforcement or were completely helpful with law enforcement, they can still file for U visa. So getting back with the abuser is not going to impact the immigration cases for the most part. But, advising them to get back with them, like you said, about the credibility. And then depending on the severity of the abuse, you want to warn them about failure to protect children, that witnessing abuse is a form of abuse. Now, how it could, impacts their children's brains and development. And so, those are, some things to consider. So let's look at all the players that may be involved when there's a co-parenting agreement or custody dispute between, and these are all maybe the people that survivors have in the family court system that they're working with. So we have the judges, the mediators. I know in some jurisdictions, mediation is a little will look different for somebody when they're a survivor, because they're not starting from an equal playing field. Guardian ad litem, the custody evaluators, the attorneys. Veronica, who do you think maybe could be the most helpful, or what can be more challenging for immigrant victims in this court system with all these players?
Well, no, but before we get into that, I was just thinking, at least in custody or divorce cases, in my jurisdiction, and I have practiced in Las Vegas and in Michigan, the judges won't appoint a guardian ad litem for the kids. And so, usually the kids who are the subject of the custody dispute don't have their own attorneys. And so, you need to deal with that, maybe, during mediation, or maybe a custody evaluator, but then it comes the time to have to pay for those services, right? There are very few pro bono services for people who are not able to afford this. And, as someone else said in the chat, that sometimes you may be representing one of the parties, but the other parent is not represented, right? And so then you have those issues too, and you have the issues of language capacity for people, or you have the issue that someone may already have a new significant other, right? And then so it gets very complicated, right? When it comes to to dealing with immigration issues, it is the same, right? Like I used to represent my clients, and then most of the abusers didn't have representation, or had an attorney who wasn't willing to really advise the other party to go to mediation or to try to come up with a settlement agreement. And so very, very difficult to navigate with those issues like that, because you are not, on an even field with the other parent. And it's hard, right? Like your clients would say, why are you talking to him, right? Like, I thought you were helping me. Why are you talking to him? And trying to explain that there are certain requirements from the court where you need to try to figure out, right? Like having all these financial disclosures or all these settlement meetings with the other parent. And your clients get upset when you're talking to them, right? And so all of those issues are hard, right? Like we definitely have, the clerks, right? Like dealing with the clerks, trying to file things, and then the other parent doesn't comply with anything because he doesn't have an attorney. And so it's very, very hard for you to navigate those issues. And and then of course you have the issue with clients getting back together, And it goes, like the judges get mad at you, right? Because, they blame you because your client went back with the abuser, or they disappeared together and then they didn't come back to court. So issues like that are just hard. I don't know how good it would be to have attorneys appointed for in cases where there are allegations of abuse and when there are children involved. I don't think the courts have the resources to do something like that in every case, but that wouldn't be bad, right? To have the kids have their voice heard through their own attorney.
And then also letting them know that these other players other than the judge might have some sway or power for the judge in the court. I know that in Wisconsin, the custody evaluator, they would appoint them right away when there was domestic violence identified or protection order in place. And very often the courts would just recommend what the custody evaluator did. So it's good to talk to them before about having good relationship with and listening to and meeting with custody evaluators, make sure that there's the language access there too ahead of time, because these people, while they're not the judges making the final order, and so a lot of jurisdictions, they have a lot of power in the outcomes of the cases.
So true. Yeah.
And if anyone wants to share their experience with immigrant survivors with any of these people, go in the court system, feel free to do on the chat. Here's a little hypothetical on what something that we probably might also, if we did a raise our hand, would see. Here, your client's going through a divorce with 2 minor children. The respondent has been arrested for domestic abuse and police documented physical abuse to your client. And during an exchange, the respondent's late, is verbally abusive, and shows up with their new significant other. Your client is upset, there starts yelling, everything escalates, and the respondent calls the police, and now they're making false allegations of abuse. How would you advise your client or try to prevent this from ever happening? Or how could you protect your client from an abuser making false allegations?
I'd have them exchange at a place that has video for sure, and possibly a lot of witnesses. Some police departments have a safe exchange parking area that has a lot of cameras, but otherwise I have definitely gone to a police, like the sheriff's department, and actually asked them, okay, where is the best video coverage in your parking lot? And they actually told me, this is one is where we always have video, and it's something that's always monitored, and it's right near a call box at the door. So that was where I made the exchange location for one of my clients. Or Walmart parking lots always have cameras all over the place.
I watch a lot of true crime, so yes, they do. You're right. And that's a good idea. You think that people have cameras, but then, the film's not going and they don't check it, they erase it. So documenting those exchanges, right, to protect them from those false allegations. Here are some strategies, telling them to just follow the court order, minimizing contact, setting firm boundaries. I see somebody, Geraldine shared, considering someone else to conduct the visitation exchanges and request in temporary orders that significant others, and if you know their name, to include their name, not be present at exchanges.
That's a great idea. I used to have a few issues where I wanted the clients to designate someone, and some judges were reluctant to do that, to put in that in the order, because the judges would say, well, I don't have jurisdiction over that person, right? I cannot ask grandma to be the one. I have no power over grandma. So, whatever, you guys can each list like 3 people and suggest 3 people that you'll agree to, and then they can be part of the exchange. But, the idea of if there's a new significant other, that person not be there during the exchange, that's a great idea, right? Coming back to exchanging in a public place, I had one of my most tragic cases when I was practicing in Las Vegas. We did the exchange at the police precinct. And, for the first 6 weeks, everything was perfect, right? The kid was like 14 months old. And one time he tells her, I have some stuff for the baby, come with me to the parking lot, right? Like I'm going to give you stuff that I have in the car. And he goes and opens the trunk of his car and then shoots my client, right? Who's holding the baby. And so even though we had decided that we were doing everything at the police precinct, he behaved for a while, then my client survived and he's still serving time to this day. But it was very, very difficult because, the client was innocent, right? Like, okay, 6 weeks, it's been working perfectly. So yeah, if he bought stuff for the baby, I'm going to follow him to where he parked his car. And then, he knew, right? And he shot her. So, very, very difficult cases like that, right? Like where you never know and you tell the clients you cannot agree to, then I got smarter, right? You cannot agree to follow him to a different location, right? Like if he is interested in giving you something for the kids, let him bring it to the exchange place, right? Like don't follow him. But, there are people who are, who forget or really very trusting still, and things like the tragedies like this happen.
Yeah, that's tragic. Yeah, let's talk about the safe exchanges, right? Another one was a judge allowed not to have their, oh, I know what I was gonna ask you. How do you guys feel about grandparenting exchanging? I see that a lot where they pick a grandparent to help with the exchanges. And I think that also can be problematic because the grandparent essentially is in many cases an extension of that other party. But here I do see a lot of time where they do allow the exchanges with a safe third party, but I think it's good to keep that third party neutral. And grandparents might not always be the most neutral person there, right? Here's a list of strategies that you could tell your clients, and we talked about them. Follow the court order, have firm boundaries, the working with the advocate, telling them to be calm and pleasant and not emotional, so that keep them from being, snarky back. Limited the amount of telephone or text messaging that they have. Not always hitting reply. You can't reason with unreasonable people. Not criticizing the ex in front of the child are some good advice, I think. Susan shares, I found that third parties usually don't work out. They can't control the abuser either. Yeah. And so what are other provisions that you've asked for safe exchanges? So we've heard you guys talk about police stations. I like the ideas that Megan had, not limiting who else is there present during the exchanges. Is there any other one that maybe one of you all have used that has really been helpful? There's some safe exchange programs where you can go to do the exchanges. I've seen some people do exchanges after school so that there just isn't any contact. So maybe visitation starts at pickup on Friday after school, and then there's no exchange. They just pick up the child from the school, and that's no contact. Oh, there it is. Have the parent pick up the child at school or daycare so that the parent isn't around.
Yeah, and then, with the population we represent, right? Many times the clients don't have transportation or money to pay for a Lyft or an Uber, right? Or if they are doing the exchange at a visit as a safe place program that is pretty far away, right? Many times they aren't that conveniently located. Like we have one in Michigan that's in the middle of nowhere, right? And I'm like, oh my God, how do they get there if they don't have a car? And so difficult stuff like that. So definitely when the kids are going to daycare or when the kids are going to school, that's perfect. And you just hope that the other parent is going to go pick up the kid and the kid is not waiting outside, right? And the parent has no way to communicate saying I'm going to be late or I'm not able to go today. So yeah.
And then here are some bullets that we put together, and it kind of piggybacks what Susan was saying. You want as much detail in the order as possible and be very clear. So very clear detail, leave very little room for misunderstanding and manipulation. And so a lot of times the abusers, they know what the order says and the commas, and can try to they'll understand it too, but to their understanding. Public place, refer to the agreement and detailed guidelines. So sometimes your client will just have to have access to that agreement. We hit all these things. But and then here was, we were talking, I heard Leslie and everyone talk about before, you would say, do you have an exchange at McDonald's? That way you get the timestamp, buy an ice cream or something so that or before there was passing of that notebook for communication. But I wanted to know how survivors were communicating now. Susan earlier said that she uses the Family Wizard app. And I wanted to know what other apps you all use, what works and how they work for LEP survivors. And so she says, there's another great reason to use our Family Wizard. They can screenshot where they are for an exchange to prevent contempt or allegations.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the Family Wizard also has that tool. And I think, Susan, last time you shared that for parents that were low income, the Family Wizard didn't cost them money, because I saw it has a lot of features as I was putting this together.
Yeah, it's a really pretty easy fee waiver application. And if you're the attorney, you can just say that you're providing free legal services and they'll do it for you.
I did not know that, because I had been looking for other free options for my clients, because all of my clients are indigent.
Right. So it's $100 a year.
Right.
But they'll waive the fee and it's pretty easy and they're super quick to get back to you. I found, if you have a question.
That's excellent. Good to know. Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
a lot of money,
Yeah.
right?
See, that made meeting today worth it for me. You guys shared information and that's great.
Hopefully they aren't as bad with the fee waivers as USCIS,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so there's several apps. I saw Family Wizard. I was reading an article about which ones are better, pros and cons. And one thing I thought was interesting was that Family Wizard has an emotional spell check on the messages. So if they're texting and it looks a little heated, it'll suggest to modify what you're sending, so that your client's not looking too aggressive to the other party. And it says that it improves their lives and stress levels immeasurably. Christina says that if your client is on food stamps or other need-based programs, they will also take that as proof to waive the fee.
That's great.
Yeah. And so these apps are helpful. And are they helpful for clients that don't speak English, that where their English is not their best, not their first language? Does anybody have experience working with a client that used it, even though they weren't English proficient?
This is Susan. I'm trying to remember if I've used it with a non-English speaking parties, but I do think that they have the I think they do have things in Spanish. And I'm pretty sure that people can use it even if they don't, if English is not their first language.
Yeah.
I should also say that they're really great about like coming and talking to groups. So like if you or your bar association or something wants them to come, they will like do a presentation about the app and how to use it.
Because they want their $100.
Right. Right.
No,
then
but that's
also, I
actually
mean,
very good, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And so what features does it have? It has, you said that you know of, or that you would want to share with the group. So I'm guessing, there's messaging with each other.
There's
There-
messaging, there's a calendar, you can put in all the like appointments and exchange times or doctor's appointments. I think there's a thing where you can, like if some bills are due, you can like, there's a place for that. I'm not as familiar with all the other features. And I just saw the representative, they sponsored an event for our bar association, our family law section. And the representative was telling me they're gonna have a new feature for where you can use the app for like video calls and chats. So like if you have to have calls with the child or video chats, you can do them on there. And then everybody knows who called and when, and if they were following the order or not.
That's a good feature. And also, to protect, I think stalking happens a lot post-separation.
Right.
And with the kids having the cell phone is the only way that they'll be able to call the other parent. And so this can safeguard on that. Are you guys, and I'm not trying to push a class on the app, but are you guys that are not using the app interested in learning more about it? If you are, put it in the chat. With that, co-parenting isn't always possible. I think I saw as I was putting these together that there, it's starting to shift from co-parenting to think parallel parenting, because there is no co when there's that abuse. And so these are some red flags, and I wanted, if you have more red flags that you've seen, but when the co-parenting is not possible, these are some of the red flags, right? So the stalking, the intimidation, and the surveillance, the calls and the texts, and that can be eliminated a lot from the apps. Undermining one parent's ability to parent or withholding information, devaluating one parent to the children, continuing to talk to the children about the case, ignoring their school activities or athletic schedules, disrupting a parent's relationship with the other parent or coercing them to be against that parent. What are some other red flags that you've seen where during the temporary order, you're starting to notice this co-parenting is not going to function?
One of these things too that has happened with a few of my cases is like, we're trying our best to make sure that the client is able to co-parent, but then one of the parents or even sometimes your client wants to move out of state. And then, what do you do, right, with that order? And maybe you don't have enough to file a motion for the client to have permission to move out of the state. And so that sometimes, right, like sometimes your client does something that is going to deny the other parent his right for visits. And how do you deal with those issues, right? Because then the other parent may come and say, okay, I'm going to ask for custody because she wants to deny me the right to be with my kids. And so those are additional complications that I have seen in my cases.
And so next month we'll talk about what to do when you're seeing that the co-parenting is not working, when to interfere, when to ask for more orders, or what to document. And we all have our own set of expertise, but I think together like we did today, can come together to refine that conversation more, to strategize better and have better approaches. And so next month, we'll talk about what are some things to look for in that final order when you're seeing co-parenting is not possible. And then we'll talk about what to do post-order, what we might want to do to avoid coming back 6 months later after that final order. And so with that, I wanted to thank you guys for your time. Thank you for sharing those experiences, what you shared today and the information. And Veronica and everyone, thank you for our class today. And we'll pick up next time on talking about what to get in that final order and what can happen post order. All right.
Great.
Well, thanks, guys. It was nice talking to you all, and we'll see you in July.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.